Few people ever notice the exact moment an empath stops caring. There is no dramatic announcement, no loud goodbye, no emotional explosion that warns everyone what is about to happen. In fact, the most powerful change often happens in complete silence. Most people believe an empath's greatest strength is how deeply they care about others. They listen when no one else listens. They stay when others leave. They forgive mistakes that would push most people away. They give second chances, third chances, and sometimes far more than that. Their compassion seems endless. Their patience appears unbreakable. Because of this, many people make a dangerous assumption. They believe the empath will always be there. They believe no matter how much they take, no matter how many times they disappoint, no matter how often they ignore the empath's feelings, that kindness will never run out. But what happens when it does? What happens when an empath finally reaches a point where they can no longer carry the emotional weight of everyone around them? The answer is often far more surprising than people expect. What makes this transformation so fascinating is that it rarely happens overnight. An empath does not simply wake up one morning and decide to stop caring. Long before anyone notices a change on the outside, a silent battle is taking place within. Every broken promise leaves a mark. Every act of disrespect creates another crack. Every moment of feeling unseen, unheard, or unappreciated slowly adds to a burden that becomes harder and harder to carry. While everyone else continues life as normal, the empath is quietly keeping score of emotional wounds they never wanted to count in the first place. One of the lesser-known truths about empaths is that they often stay loyal long after their hearts have been hurt. Many people mistake this loyalty for weakness. In reality, it comes from hope. Hope that people will change. Hope that relationships will improve. Hope that kindness will eventually be returned. Yet hope has limits, and when those limits are finally reached, a remarkable shift begins to happen. The empath who once chased understanding becomes silent. The person who constantly gave emotional support begins to pull back. The individual who always worried about everyone else's feelings starts paying attention to their own. To outsiders, this change can seem sudden and confusing, but for the empath, it is often the result of months or even years of emotional exhaustion. What makes this stage so powerful is that many people never recognize it until it is too late. They notice the empath is no longer arguing, no longer explaining, no longer trying to fix every problem. At first, this calmness may look harmless. Some even mistake it for acceptance. But in many cases, it signals something much deeper. It signals emotional detachment. And once an empath reaches this stage, the relationship, friendship, or connection may already be closer to the end than anyone realizes. Psychology experts often describe emotional burnout as a state where a person becomes mentally and emotionally drained after prolonged stress. For empaths, this process can be even more intense because they naturally absorb the emotions and struggles of those around them. They often carry burdens that were never theirs to carry. They spend years helping others heal while quietly neglecting their own needs. Over time, this imbalance creates consequences that are rarely discussed. The caring does not disappear because the empath becomes cold. It disappears because the empath finally understands that endless giving without healthy boundaries comes at a cost. In this video, we are going to uncover what really happens when an empath finally stops caring. We will explore the warning signs that most people miss. We will reveal why this change often shocks friends, family members, and partners. We will look at the emotional transformation that takes place behind the scenes and discover why many empaths become stronger, calmer, and more confident after reaching this turning point. We will also discuss the hidden psychological reasons behind this shift and why some relationships never recover once an empath emotionally checks out. Most importantly, you will learn why an empath's silence can sometimes say more than years of words ever could. As this story unfolds, you may recognize patterns that are far more common than people realize. Some of them may even challenge everything you thought you knew about empathy, kindness, and emotional strength. The final stages of this transformation contain lessons that many people only understand after experiencing them firsthand, which is why watching until the very end will give you a complete picture of what truly happens when an empath finally decides they can no longer give away pieces of themselves to those who never valued them. So if you're ready to discover the truth behind one of the most misunderstood emotional shifts a person can experience, you're in the right place. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy thoughtful insights about empathy, psychology, relationships, and personal growth, make sure to subscribe and join our community, because the journey we're about to begin may change the way you see empaths forever. One of the biggest misunderstandings about empaths is the belief that they can tolerate anything. People often look at an empath's patience and assume it has no limits. They see someone who remains calm during conflict, someone who forgives after being hurt, someone who continues showing kindness even when that kindness is not returned, and they begin to believe that this behavior will last forever. Over time, many people become so accustomed to receiving understanding from an empath that they stop appreciating it. They start seeing it as normal. They expect forgiveness before they even apologize. They expect support without offering support in return. They expect loyalty without earning it. What they fail to realize is that patience is not the same as acceptance. Just because an empath stays does not mean they are unaffected. Just because they forgive does not mean they forget. Just because they continue caring does not mean they are not slowly reaching their limit. This misunderstanding causes many people to completely miss what is actually happening beneath the surface. While everyone focuses on the empath's kindness, very few pay attention to the emotional weight that kindness is carrying. Empaths are naturally inclined to see the good in people. Even when someone disappoints them, they often search for explanations rather than immediately passing judgment. They understand that people have struggles. They understand that everyone makes mistakes. They understand that pain can cause people to behave in unhealthy ways. Because of this, they frequently give others more chances than most people would. They try to look beyond actions and understand intentions. They focus on potential rather than reality. They hold on to hope even when evidence suggests they should let go. This quality makes them incredibly compassionate, but it can also make them vulnerable. Some people begin relying on that compassion without ever questioning whether they deserve it. Others start taking advantage of it. They assume the empath will always understand. They assume the empath will always stay. They assume the empath will always make room for one more mistake, one more excuse, one more broken promise. The truth is far more complicated. An empath's decision to stop caring rarely happens in a single moment. It develops slowly, sometimes so slowly that even the empath does not immediately recognize what is happening. Every disappointment leaves an impression. Every ignored feeling creates distance. Every act of disrespect weakens trust. These experiences do not simply disappear, they accumulate. They settle deep within the empath's mind. While others move on from an argument or a hurtful situation, the empath often spends time reflecting on it. They replay conversations. They analyze behavior, they search for meaning, they try to understand what went wrong and how it can be fixed. For a long time, they remain focused on repairing the connection. They invest emotional energy into solving problems that many people would have already walked away from. Yet with every attempt that fails, a small piece of hope begins to fade. This is why empaths often leave emotionally long before they leave physically. The emotional departure starts quietly. There is no dramatic announcement, no sudden declaration that they no longer care. Instead, there is a gradual shift that happens beneath the surface. They begin questioning whether their efforts are making a difference. They start noticing patterns they once ignored. They become aware of how often they are giving compared to how often they are receiving. They begin recognizing that understanding someone does not automatically excuse their behavior. Little by little, their perspective changes. The connection that once felt strong starts feeling one-sided. The relationship that once felt meaningful starts feeling exhausting. Yet they often remain present because a part of them still hopes things will improve. Many people mistake this continued presence as proof that everything is fine. They see the empath still answering messages, still showing up, still being polite, and assume nothing has changed. What they do not see is the internal process taking place. They do not see the emotional distance that has already begun to grow. They do not see the exhaustion that has been building for months or even years. They do not see the countless moments when the empath chose silence instead of confrontation because they were simply too tired to keep fighting for understanding. By the time others finally notice a difference, the empath has often been struggling privately for a very long time. The real change begins long before anyone notices it. One of the reasons this change is overlooked is because empaths do not stop caring overnight. In movies and dramatic stories, people often reach a breaking point and instantly walk away. Real life is rarely that simple. Empaths tend to endure far more than people realize. They spend significant amounts of time trying to preserve relationships. They look for solutions. They start difficult conversations. They communicate their needs. They explain their feelings. They offer opportunities for change. Even after being disappointed multiple times, they continue hoping that things can improve. This willingness to keep trying is one of their most admirable qualities, but it is also one of the reasons they become emotionally exhausted. Repeated disappointments have a cumulative effect. A single broken promise may be forgivable. Two broken promises may still leave room for understanding. But when broken promises become a pattern, trust begins to erode. The empath starts realizing that words and actions are not matching. They hear apologies that lead to no change. They receive reassurance that quickly fades. They witness the same behaviors repeating again and again. At first, they continue believing improvement is possible. They tell themselves that everyone struggles. They remind themselves that growth takes time. Yet eventually a difficult question begins to emerge. What if the problem is not temporary? What if the person has no intention of changing at all? Trust is one of the most important foundations for an empath. Because they value emotional connection so deeply, broken trust affects them profoundly. Every time trust is damaged, they invest energy trying to rebuild it. They want to believe in people. They want to believe relationships can heal. They want to believe honesty and effort will eventually prevail. But rebuilding trust requires participation from both sides. When that effort becomes one-sided, exhaustion follows. The empath starts carrying responsibilities that do not belong solely to them. They become the problem solver, the peacekeeper, the emotional support system, and the source of understanding all at once. Over time, this imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. Emotional exhaustion does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it appears as quiet disappointment. Sometimes it appears as reduced enthusiasm. Sometimes it appears as a growing sense of numbness. The empath still cares, but the energy required to keep giving becomes harder to find. Conversations that once felt meaningful begin feeling repetitive. Arguments that once seemed worth resolving begin feeling pointless. Situations that once inspired hope begin creating frustration. The empath starts noticing how much effort is being spent without meaningful results. This realization can be painful because it forces them to confront a truth they have been avoiding. Constant giving without receiving creates another layer of exhaustion. Empaths often provide emotional support freely. They listen to problems. They offer comfort. They celebrate successes. They remain available during difficult times. Yet in unhealthy relationships, this support is rarely returned with the same consistency. The empath becomes a source of strength for everyone else, while quietly struggling alone. Their needs receive less attention. Their feelings become secondary. Their emotional well-being is overlooked. At first, they accept this imbalance because they genuinely care. Over time, however, the cost becomes impossible to ignore. Despite all of this, empaths usually stay hopeful longer than most people would. They continue searching for reasons to believe. They continue looking for signs of improvement. They continue offering chances that many others would never give. This is why their eventual withdrawal surprises so many people. Those who have grown accustomed to endless understanding cannot comprehend why the empath suddenly seems different. They fail to recognize that the empath did not change overnight. The change has been developing quietly for a long time. Eventually, something inside them changes. The shift is often subtle at first. The empath begins protecting their energy in ways they never did before. They become more selective about where they invest their attention. They stop rushing to solve every problem. They stop assuming responsibility for everyone's emotions. They begin noticing how drained they feel after certain interactions. Instead of automatically giving more, they start questioning whether giving more will actually help. This is not cruelty, it is awareness. As emotional detachment begins, emotional investment decreases. The empath still cares, but they are no longer willing to sacrifice themselves indefinitely. Their reactions become smaller. Situations that once triggered long emotional discussions receive shorter responses. Arguments that once consumed hours of energy no longer seem worth pursuing. They start recognizing that some conflicts repeat because the other person has no intention of changing. Rather than exhausting themselves trying to force understanding, they step back. One of the clearest signs of this transformation is silence. For years, the empath may have expressed their concerns openly. They may have explained how certain actions affected them. They may have asked for respect, honesty, or effort. But when emotional detachment begins, those conversations often decrease. The empath stops repeating the same message. They stop trying to convince people to care. They stop fighting for recognition. Not because the issue no longer matters, but because they have realized that constant explanation is not producing results. This silence is often misunderstood. Some people assume the problem has been resolved. Others assume the empath has become indifferent. Neither assumption is accurate. The silence usually reflects acceptance. The empath has accepted that not everyone is willing to listen. They have accepted that not everyone values the relationship equally. They have accepted that some lessons cannot be taught through words. As a result, they conserve their energy rather than continuing a battle that leads nowhere. This is often the first warning sign, although many people fail to recognize it. They mistake reduced reactions for increased patience. They mistake emotional distance for emotional stability. They mistake silence for forgiveness. In reality, the empath is often reaching a point where they no longer see a future worth fighting for. The emotional connection that once motivated endless effort is beginning to fade. As this process continues, another major transformation takes place. The empath's rescue instinct begins to disappear. For much of their life, they may have felt responsible for helping others. They may have believed that enough love, enough patience, enough understanding, or enough support could help someone change. They often carried burdens that were never theirs to carry. They worried about other people's happiness. They tried to solve other people's problems. They invested tremendous energy into helping others heal. Eventually, however, experience teaches them an important lesson. Not everyone wants to be saved. Not everyone wants to grow. Not everyone wants to take responsibility for their actions. No amount of empathy can force another person to change. No amount of sacrifice can create effort where effort does not exist. This realization can be difficult, but it is also incredibly freeing. The empath begins releasing responsibilities that never belong to them. They stop feeling obligated to fix every situation. They stop believing they must rescue everyone from the consequences of their choices. They stop sacrificing their mental and emotional health to keep others comfortable. For the first time, they start placing their own well-being on the same level as everyone else's. What makes this transformation remarkable is that compassion does not disappear. The empath does not become heartless. They do not lose their ability to care. They simply stop confusing compassion with self-sacrifice. They learn that kindness does not require self-neglect. They learn that understanding someone does not mean tolerating harmful behavior. They learn that caring about others should never require abandoning themselves. As this transformation continues, the people around the empath often become confused. For years, they became familiar with a certain version of that person. They knew the empath as someone who would always listen, always explain, always try again, and always keep the door open. They grew comfortable with the predictability of that kindness. Even when conflicts happened, they expected the empath to eventually return to the same pattern. They expected another conversation, another chance, another effort to fix what was broken. Because this cycle repeated so many times in the past, it began to feel permanent. The possibility that the empath could truly change seemed impossible. That is why the shift often catches people completely off guard. One of the first things others notice is the absence of emotional reactions. Situations that once triggered long discussions suddenly receive very little response. Comments that once caused hurt no longer produce visible frustration. Arguments that previously lasted hours are met with silence or a brief acknowledgement. To outsiders, this calmness can feel strange. Some assume the empath has become stronger. Others assume they have become colder. Some even believe they are simply pretending not to care. What they fail to understand is that the emotional energy fueling those reactions has already begun to disappear. In the past, the empath reacted because the relationship mattered deeply to them. They argued because they wanted understanding. They expressed disappointment because they wanted improvement. They communicated because they believed the connection was worth saving. Their emotional reactions were often a sign of investment. When that investment begins to fade, so do the reactions. The absence of emotion is not always a sign that the problem has been solved. Sometimes it is a sign that the empath no longer believes their efforts will make a difference. This is where confusion starts to grow. Many people are accustomed to receiving emotional responses. They know how to handle tears, frustration, concern, or disappointment. Those reactions give them information. They provide reassurance that the empath still cares. But when those reactions disappear, uncertainty takes their place. The empath's calmness becomes difficult to interpret. Suddenly, familiar patterns stop working. Familiar conversations stop producing the same results. Familiar methods of influence begin to lose their power. Manipulation becomes far less effective once an empath starts emotionally detaching. In the past, guilt may have been enough to pull them back into situations that drained them. They may have felt responsible for other people's happiness. They may have worried constantly about disappointing others. They may have sacrificed their own needs because they could not bear the thought of causing emotional pain. Manipulative individuals often rely on these tendencies. They know how to trigger guilt. They know how to create a sense of obligation. They know how to make the empath question themselves. But something changes when the empath begins seeing these patterns clearly. They start recognizing the difference between genuine accountability and manufactured guilt. They realize that caring about others does not mean accepting responsibility for emotions that are not theirs to manage. They begin understanding that someone else's disappointment is not always evidence that they have done something wrong. This awareness creates distance between the empath and the manipulation that once affected them. As guilt loses its influence, many people become even more confused. They wonder why their usual tactics no longer work. They wonder why the empath is no longer rushing to fix everything. They wonder why emotional pressure suddenly feels ineffective. What they do not realize is that the empath has reached a point where protecting their peace matters more than maintaining unhealthy patterns. The calmness that emerges during this stage often surprises everyone. It surprises friends, it surprises family members, it surprises romantic partners. Sometimes it even surprises the empath themselves. For years, they may have associated caring with constant emotional involvement. They may have believed that love required endless sacrifice. They may have assumed that being a good person meant always putting others first. Now they are discovering a different reality. They are learning that peace can exist without constant struggle. They are learning that silence can be more powerful than endless explanation. This calmness is not created through anger. It is not fueled by revenge. It comes from exhaustion transforming into clarity. The empath stops fighting battles that no longer serve a purpose. They stop trying to force understanding where understanding is not being offered. They stop carrying burdens that belong to other people. As this happens, their energy begins returning to them. This is one reason the change feels so powerful. For a long time, caring was one of the empath's greatest emotional investments. They invested time, attention, patience, forgiveness, understanding, and support into the people around them. They gave these things freely because they believed relationships were worth nurturing. Every act of kindness represented an investment. Every second chance represented an investment. Every difficult conversation represented an investment. They poured emotional resources into connections because they genuinely wanted those connections to thrive. Most people never stop to consider how valuable that investment truly is until it disappears. When the empath withdraws emotionally, the flow of energy changes. The attention that once went outward begins turning inward. The support that was constantly available becomes less accessible. The endless patience that people relied on is no longer guaranteed. Suddenly, those who benefited from the empath's investment realize how much they had been receiving. This shift can feel incredibly powerful because emotional leverage disappears along with emotional investment. Many unhealthy dynamics survive because one person is deeply invested while the other person takes that investment for granted. The invested person keeps trying, they keep forgiving, they keep hoping, they keep returning. As long as that pattern continues, the imbalance remains stable. When the empath stops investing at the same level, the imbalance becomes visible. The emotional leverage others once held begins fading. Attempts to create guilt become less effective. Attempts to provoke emotional reactions become less effective. Attempts to control the relationship through emotional pressure become less effective. The empath is no longer operating from the same emotional place. Their priorities have changed. One of the most significant aspects of this transformation is that the empath stops seeking validation. For years, they may have looked for reassurance that their efforts mattered. They may have wanted acknowledgement, appreciation, understanding, or reciprocity. They may have hoped that if they explained themselves clearly enough, others would finally understand their perspective. Over time, however, they realized that validation cannot always come from other people. Some individuals are unwilling to provide it, others are incapable of providing it. Continuing to chase validation in those situations only creates more frustration. Eventually, the empath reaches a point where external approval loses its importance. They stop measuring their worth through someone else's response. This change creates a new kind of freedom. The empath no longer needs constant confirmation that their feelings are valid. They no longer need everyone to agree with them. They no longer need every relationship to end with complete understanding. Instead, they begin trusting their own perspective. They begin respecting their own experiences. They begin recognizing that their emotions deserve attention whether others acknowledge them or not. Alongside this shift comes another important realization. The empath stops chasing understanding from people who have repeatedly shown they do not want to understand. This does not mean they stop valuing communication. It means they stop forcing communication where it is unwelcome. They stop repeating the same explanations. They stop exhausting themselves trying to make someone care. They accept that understanding must be mutual. As this acceptance grows, emotional independence begins to emerge. The empath becomes less dependent on external reactions. They become less vulnerable to emotional manipulation. They become less affected by the opinions of people who consistently fail to respect them. Their sense of stability starts coming from within rather than from the responses of others. This is where true transformation begins. For the first time in a long time, the empath starts experiencing what life feels like without carrying everyone else's emotional weight. The difference can be profound. Energy that was once consumed by conflict becomes available for growth. Time that was once spent worrying becomes available for healing. Attention that was once directed toward fixing others becomes available for self-discovery. One of the greatest things the empath gains during this stage is inner peace. Not the temporary peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but a deeper peace that comes from accepting reality. They stop fighting against truths they cannot change. They stop forcing relationships into forms they were never meant to take. They stop expecting different outcomes from the same unhealthy patterns. This acceptance creates a sense of calm that many have not experienced in years. Inner peace often arrives gradually. At first, it may feel unfamiliar. The empath may notice fewer emotional highs and lows. They may notice less anxiety about other people's choices. They may notice a greater ability to focus on their own needs. Over time, this calmness becomes a foundation for healthier living. Clear boundaries begin to emerge as well. In the past, boundaries may have felt uncomfortable. The empath may have worried that saying no would disappoint people. They may have feared being viewed as selfish. They may have believed that strong boundaries would damage relationships. Through experience, however, they learn that boundaries are not barriers against love. They are protections for emotional well-being. These boundaries help the empath identify which relationships are healthy and which are not. People who genuinely care tend to respect boundaries. People who benefited from unlimited access often resist them. This difference reveals valuable information. It shows the empath who values them as a person and who merely valued what they could provide. Emotional freedom follows. The empath no longer feels trapped in cycles of obligation. They no longer feel responsible for fixing every problem. They no longer carry the pressure of meeting everyone's expectations. This freedom allows them to make choices based on what is healthy rather than what is expected. Self-respect grows alongside this freedom. For years, the empath may have placed other people's needs above their own. They may have overlooked their own pain while focusing on everyone else's struggles. Now they begin treating themselves with the same compassion they once reserved exclusively for others. They recognize that their needs matter, their feelings matter, their well-being matters. As self-respect increases, relationship standards change. The empath becomes more selective about who receives their energy. They stop choosing people who only take. They stop investing in relationships that survive solely through their effort. They stop confusing emotional availability with unlimited access. Instead, they begin choosing people who reciprocate. People who listen as much as they speak. People who give as well as receive. People who respect boundaries rather than testing them. People who appreciate kindness rather than exploiting it. These healthier relationships create a completely different emotional experience. What many people never realize is that when an empath finally stops caring, it is rarely driven by anger. Anger may appear at certain moments during the journey, but it is usually not the final destination. The final destination is often far quieter than people expect. It is not revenge. Revenge requires ongoing emotional investment. It requires a desire to make someone suffer. Most empaths eventually become too exhausted for that. They are not interested in causing pain. They are interested in finding peace. It is not cruelty either. Cruelty requires a willingness to harm. Empaths generally do not lose their compassionate nature. Even after being hurt, many continue wishing others well from a distance. They simply stop sacrificing themselves for people who refuse to value what they offer. The hidden truth is far simpler and far more powerful. It is acceptance. Acceptance that not everyone will change. Acceptance that not every relationship can be saved. Acceptance that understanding another person's struggles does not erase the consequences of their actions. Acceptance that some doors must close so healthier ones can open. Most importantly, it is acceptance that their energy is valuable, their attention is valuable, their kindness is valuable, their time is valuable. And once they fully understand that truth, they begin treating those gifts with a level of care they never allowed themselves before. When an empath finally stops caring, they do not become cold-hearted. They do not lose their ability to love. They do not suddenly stop being kind. What changes is their awareness. They finally see what they have been carrying for far too long. They recognize the relationships that only survived because of their effort. They recognize the people who took their kindness for granted. And they recognize that constantly sacrificing themselves was never the same thing as love. The greatest transformation happens when an empath stops pouring their energy into places where it is never appreciated. Instead of chasing acceptance, they begin accepting themselves. Instead of seeking validation from others, they begin trusting their own worth. Instead of fighting to keep every connection alive, they learn that some endings are necessary for new beginnings to happen. That is why the moment an empath stops caring is not really an ending at all. It is the beginning of something much more important. It is the moment they stop losing themselves in other people's problems. The moment they stop carrying burdens that were never theirs to carry. The moment they finally return to the person they neglected for so long, themselves. And perhaps that is the hidden lesson behind everything we discussed today. Sometimes the strongest act of love is not giving more. Sometimes it is knowing when to step back. Sometimes growth is not about holding on. Sometimes it is about letting go. If this message resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced this kind of transformation, or have you seen it happen to someone close to you? Your story might help someone else who is going through the same journey right now. If you enjoyed this video and want more content about empathy, psychology, relationships, emotional intelligence, and personal growth, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upcoming video. And if you believe this message could help someone understand their own worth a little better, please take a moment to like this video and share it with them. Thank you for watching until the end. Remember, an empath's greatest strength is not how much they can endure. It is knowing when their energy deserves a better place to grow. And sometimes, the most powerful chapter of their life begins the moment they stop giving it away.